Did you know that the GraphQL specification defines 5 scalar types? You didn't? Well, it's a good thing you're here. What's up, friends? Dan Vega here, and today I want to have a discussion about scalars in GraphQL. So the GraphQL specification defines these 5 scalars. They are int, float, string, boolean, and ID. Now, this will get you a long way in your application when you're defining your schema, but what happens when you need a custom scalar? And you will. We're going to create a brand new Spring Boot 3 project. We'll include Spring for GraphQL, which is built on GraphQL Java, and then we'll take a look at defining our schema. That schema is going to include those default or built-in scalars, but then we'll also take a look at how we can bring in custom scalars when we need to, and again, you will. So what are we waiting for? Let's head over and write some code. If you've seen my videos before, you know what we're doing here. To create a new project, we are going to head over to start.spring.io, and we're going to select a few pieces of information here. So the first thing is the project type. I like to go ahead and choose Maven. You can choose whatever you want. I'm using Java. The latest version of Spring Boot at the time of this recording is 3.0.2. And then we need to fill in some metadata about our project. I'm going to say my group is dev.danvega. The artifact is going to be GraphQL Scalars. So now that we have our metadata filled in, we're going to choose packaging. We're going to use Java 17. We need a couple dependencies. So we're going to build a web application today. I'm going to choose Spring Web. And then we need our GraphQL dependencies. So I'm going to go ahead and choose Spring for GraphQL. And that's all we need. GraphQL gives us all the pieces we need to kind of build out the API. Spring Web gives us that transport layer, so we have that single entry point into our GraphQL API. And that's what we need. So what we got to do is go ahead and hit generate. That will download a zip file. I'm going to open this up in IntelliJ Ultimate. That happens to be my favorite IDE, what I'm most productive in. But you can use whatever text editor or IDE you are most productive in. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's open it up there and let's talk about this application. All right, to get this going, I'm going to go ahead and create a new model here in my application. So I'm going to create a new model package. I'm going to create a new class, and we're going to call this product. I've been using kind of the products domain in the last few videos, so we'll stick with that. So I'm going to say product, and this is going to be a class. We are going to use, and actually I'm going to go ahead and add a couple new dependencies here just to show you that we don't always select the right things when we are creating a new application. There are things that we may want to add to it later. So I'm going to add a new dependency for Spring Boot Starter Data JPA. We are going to grab that from there. And I'm also going to add a dependency for H2. And this is an in-memory database. I am just going to use Spring Data JPA to kind of simplify the data side of things. So we're going to use a product here. This is going to be a Spring Data entity. So let's go ahead and do that. And then we need an ID. So I need an ID, so this can just be an integer. So we'll call it ID. Then we're also going to use a title. And then we'll come back to the rest of the fields later. So I'm going to create a new constructor. We need a noargs constructor for Spring Data JPA. We also need a constructor to take in our title. So this ID we want to go ahead and have be generated by the persistence layer. So we'll say @generated value. And finally, we're just going to need some getters and setters. So we'll say getter and setter. And a toString will round this out. So now that we have our product, we want to go ahead and create a simple repository to be able to fetch data from the database, or persist data, if you will. So I'm going to create a new repository package. We'll create a new Java class called product repository, and this will be an interface that extends the list CRUD repository, which takes in a type of not that, Dan, product and integer. So we have a product model, we have a product repository, we are getting there. I'm going to create a, let's go ahead and I think that's all we need for that. We don't need a data source because we're not actually going to pull up the H2 console. So let's go ahead and create a couple different products. So we're going to do this by using a command line runner. So we'll say command line runner, command line runner. And so command line runner, if you're new here, is a functional interface. This just means it has a single abstract method. You'll see that it takes an argument, string var args of args. And so this is a functional interface, which means it's a candidate for a Lambda expression. We don't need to create a new class that implements that interface. We can just go ahead and implement it here with a Lambda. So I'll just say return args, and that will be that. So now I need my product repository in there. We'll call this product repository. Actually, let's just call it repository. Here I'm going to create a few new products. So we'll say list.of, we'll say new product, and this will just take in a title. We'll say new product, product 2, and then we'll say new product, and then product 3. So I want to go ahead and put these on separate lines because we're going to expand this at some point. And then what we need to do here is actually introduce a variable. We'll call this products. So now we have all 3 products, and we can go ahead and persist those off to the database using the repository, save all products. And then I just want to print those out to make sure they are in the database. So I'll say repository.findAll.forEach system.out print a line. So if we've done everything correctly, we will persist 3 products to the database, and then we'll print them out. And you can see those IDs are being generated by the database for me. So I have 3 products in the database. And now it comes time to introduce kind of the GraphQL side of things. So we're going to go into resources, and we're going to create a new directory called GraphQL. This is by convention. You can always go ahead and change this if you'd like. But I'm going to create a new file in here. So we'll say new file, and this will be called schema.graphqls. And here's where we will define our schema. So we start with our object type. So we have an object type of product. And this is where these scalars come into place. On the left of the declaration here is going to be the field name. So I'm going to call this field, and then we need to give it a type. So remember, those 5 types are ID, string, Boolean, int, and float. So of course, this one is going to be ID. And that is just kind of representing a unique identifier in our type. The exclamation point says, hey, you don't ever have to worry about this being null. So we have that. Then we have a title, and this is going to be of type string. We have a product, and we've defined our types using the built-in scalars. So now I'm going to go ahead and just create a quick type called query, and I want a way to get all products, and this is going to return a collection of products. So we're going to test this out, and then we'll talk about some custom scalars. So I'm going to create a new package here. We'll call this controller. Inside of controller, I will create a new Java class, and we'll call this product controller. In the GraphQL world, we're going to mark this with @controller. I need a way to get those products out of the database. I'm going to create a new private final product repository, and we'll get this through constructor injection. And then finally, I just need a way to get all of my products. So I'll get a list of products, and this will be called find all, and we will return the repository.findAll method. Now I just need to hook this up to the GraphQL schema. So the name of this is called all products, and it's of type query. So actually I want to call this all products, and because it's of type query, now I can just use the @query mapping annotation, and that will line those 2 up for me. So from a property standpoint, I just want to enable that graphical user interface, so I can say true. And I'll go ahead and restart this application. And if everything's good, we can head over to the browser. And we'll go to localhost 8080/graphical. This will load up the GraphQL Playground to kind of validate our queries here. So I can type in query. I get some IntelliSense here, so I can say all products, and we know that we have an ID and a title from here. If we go ahead and hit run, we get those 3 products that we've saved in our system. All right, so let's head back over to our product model, and I want to introduce a few more properties so we can start talking about, let's use all of the built-in scalars, and then we'll talk about some custom ones. So let's say that we've used integer and title. We need a Boolean, a float, and we've used, so what do we need? Boolean, float, int, string, and ID. So Boolean and float. So let's start with that. So let's have a private Boolean. Let's call this is on sale. So we'll have something called is on sale. We'll have a float for, I don't know why I'm doing that. We'll have a float. And we'll call this, let's just call this weight. And then, so we have ID, string, Boolean, float, int. Oh, so that is the int. We're not going to do an int, same as float. So those are our main ones. So these will cover 4 of the 5 built-in scalars. So if we wanted to, we can go ahead and replace this with a new constructor that should take in a title, is on sale, and weight. And then we'll just create a couple more getters and setters here. So getters and setters for those 2. And let's go ahead and replace this toString with everything. Great. So now when we go ahead and create these products, we'll need a few more properties. So this takes in, new product is on sale. We'll just say true. And then the weight is 0.99. We'll just call that. Let's say 1.99. So yeah, probably could have used a double here, but I'm just trying to show this off. So let's say false and 3.99. And let's say true 19.99. Okay, so those are our 3. Now if we go back to our schema, we say that we need a is on sale. This is going to be a Boolean, and then we have weight, which is going to be a float. So let's go ahead and try to restart this application. We'll head over to our graphical, and we'll say, we're going to actually have to refresh this if you want to get that IntelliSense on there. So we'll say we want is on sale and weight. So now if we go ahead and run that, we should get everything we need. So great. So now the question comes in, what happens when we need some custom scalars? So let's think of a couple things. One I could think of as price. We would want this to be a big, oops, we're on the wrong side here. Let's get out of here for a second, go back to our product. And up here, I want to define a big decimal for our price. And I want to define a local date time for our, let's say, the time that this was created, right? So those are 2 that we don't have scalars for. We need some custom scalars for this. All right, so the first place to look is at the GraphQL Java documentation. Again, Spring for GraphQL is built on GraphQL Java. So you can look in here for some explanation on scalars in GraphQL. So again, the GraphQL spec defines these built in. We also get these extended scalars, which could be things like long, shorts, bytes, big decimals, or big integers. But we need to pull in a separate library for that. So this GraphQL Java extended scalars library adds the following types, which are useful in Java-based systems. So if I go ahead and open that up, you can see that it will walk you through how to pull this in for Maven. So this is the current dependency. I'm going to copy that. and then it talks about how to use them. So we'll bounce back to this in a second. So the first thing I want to do is just go ahead and include this dependency. So I'm going to say right here, we're going to pull that in. I'm going to refresh. And then if we go back to the documentation, basically says, hey, you need to create a bean that looks like this. And all it does is there's the extended scalars dot. So there's a static field for whatever scalar you're trying to bring in. And then you can declare it right in your schema. So let's do that. Let's go ahead and create a new package. We'll call this config. And inside of config, I'm going to create a new Java class. We'll call this GraphQL config. So this is going to be a configuration class. And I'm just going to pull that bean in. And all we're going to do is, if you look at this, we're going to say extended scalars dot, and then the one that you need. So in my case, I need a GraphQL big decimal, and I'm going to choose that. Okay, so now you could add more if you needed to. So if I wanted to come down here, I could say dot scalar, and then I could say extended scalars dot date time. Now here's the thing with date time. So date time, if we look at here, on RFC 339 compliant datetime scalar that accepts string values like this and produces a java.time.offset datetime. So this is what this is going to map to. So if you're using something like local date time, this one is not going to work. If offset date time is going to work for you, great. You don't need to do anything else. You could just use this. I can't actually use that. I'm working with a local date time object, and that will not work. So how can I solve this one? So there is another project called GraphQL Java Datetime. And this produces an ISO date, RFC 339 compliant datetime scalar type. And you can see that there is starters for GraphQL Java Kickstart, Netflix DGS, and also Spring for GraphQL. So that means if we go ahead and include this dependency in here, Spring, if we go ahead and include this dependency, then all we have to do is declare the scalar type here. We don't need to do any kind of wiring up. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to include that in my pom.xml. So if I go down, I have one more dependency to declare, but again, I'm getting a Spring Boot starter out of here. So now if I go back to my schema, I should be able to say the price is a big decimal. Oops, I didn't actually declare these. Let's do that. So I want to come up here in my schema. And the way that you define these is by using the keyword scalar. And then I'm going to use a big decimal. And I'm also going to use the local date time. So now when I'm in here, now I can say price is going to be big decimal. And my not is on sale, sorry. My date created is going to be a local date time. So now we've changed nothing on the Spring side. We just have our repository still. We're going to go ahead and restart our application. And everything looks okay. If you had some errors here, that would kind of tell you that you didn't configure something correctly. So I'm going to head back to the browser. And if I go ahead and add on our two new fields, so again, I'm going to have to refresh this and say price and date created. And if I go ahead and run this, everything does not look great. We have price and date created are null. That would be because back in our application, we did not add any. So let's do that. And I think actually before we do that, we're going to have to adjust our constructor to yes, we are. So instead of typing, I'm just going to have it create this for us. So we're going to say that. And we have a couple more fields here. So let's say getters and setters for these two. And let's create one big toString. Great. So now back here in my application, I'm looking for a new big decimal. We'll say this is 999. And then I need a local dates time dot now looks good. So I'm just going to kind of copy this for both of these. Nope. And yes. So, okay, let's go ahead and go back to our schema. This looks good. Let's try and restart this and see if we can't get those values. Good, no errors. And I'm going to go ahead and run this again, and there we go. So now we get our price, which is $9.99, and our date created, which is a local date time, which is a timestamp of now. So cool. I think that's really what I wanted to cover today. Again, there are 5 built-in scalars, which are int, float, string, boolean, and ID. As soon as you need custom ones, and you will, I always check the GraphQL Java documentation first to kind of get an understanding of those. Most of the time when you need something, you can find it in one of these other projects that we just talked about today. On the off chance that you need to write your own custom scalar, please make sure that you look first. It's probably been written already, but if you have some weird scenario where you need to write your own custom scalars, you can do that as well. So there's an example here in the documentation on how to do that. So cool. I hope you found this useful. I hope this was helpful information. I hope you guys are working on GraphQL APIs. I'm a huge fan of GraphQL. I'm a huge fan of Spring for GraphQL and GraphQL Java. It just makes my life so much easier. And I love building APIs over in Spring using these projects. So if you did find this useful, do me a big favor, friends. Go ahead and leave me a thumbs up on this video. Subscribe to the channel. And as always, happy coding.